Welcome, everyone. We are so pleased to have this next presentation here on the as part of the education here at the AIMExpo. My name is Darius Blackford. I'm the organizational director of the National Powersports Dealer Association. This session is titled, Revving Up Your Wealth, Understanding the Value of Your Powersports Dealership. Whether you're gearing up to step away from your business now or 10 years from today, understanding the value of your powersports dealership is critical. Our panelists will shed light on the key components that contribute to the valuation and financial success of your powersports dealership. From navigating the current economic and buy-sell trends to actions that grow the value of your dealership and your overall wealth, to financial planning ideas that will help you make better business decisions, this session has it all. Our panelists from Morgan Stanley and Performance Brokerage Services are valued partners of the NPDA, and it's a pleasure to introduce them today. I'm actually very pleased because we've hosted them before all of you get to hear them. We've done multiple webinars on these very subjects. Very, very great information. I think you're going to really find some benefit. So Brad Stanek and Paulina Matel with the Stanek Group at Morgan Stanley are financial advisors, certified financial planners, and are registered to do business in all 50 states. Having worked with countless dealers over the past years, they are highly familiar with the many challenges you face in achieving your unique financial goals and are highly adept at leveraging the global resources and vast capabilities of Morgan Stanley. The Stanek Group prides itself on helping dealers become financially independent of their dealerships, assisting many with graceful business exit strategies. Courtney, Bernhard, and George Chaconas, who lead the National Powersports and Harley-Davidson division at Performance Brokerage Services, which is the highest volume dealership brokerage firm in North America. As a family company, it is governed by the utmost ethical conduct and integrity, benefiting from more than 25 years of experience, 900 dealerships sold, and a 90% closing rate. Enjoy the session and stay tuned for the great resources they offer, such as the Second Opinion service. An added touch to that is one of our board members took part in this service and has found this to be extremely valuable. Again, take advantage of this information today, and thank you for being here. Brad, take it away.
Thank you, Darius. Welcome, everybody. I know we've got a smaller crowd, but I have a feeling the most important people are in the audience right now. We appreciate you being here. We're going to be having a panel discussion for about 35 minutes and time left over for any questions and answers that you may have. Also, Anthony Nask on our team has probably handed each of you a form to potentially fill out towards the end. There's one important question we forgot to put on here, and that is on a scale of 1 to 10, how did we do today? So we're going to ask at the end, you just put the number in the corner, and that lets us know how we did and what we can improve on. Appreciate everybody again coming, and when you look at your dealership, we all know the importance of knowing what the value may be when we're looking to sell. But Paulina, why don't you share with us, why is it important to understand the value of your dealership, even if you don't plan to sell soon?
Well, Brett, as you've mentioned, regardless when or even if you are choosing to sell your powersports dealership at some point in time, it's probably the largest and the most significant asset on your personal net worth statement. And just in our experience, when we look at dealer financial statements, a dealership can comprise anywhere from 70 to 85% of the dealer's total net worth. And that's going to typically include the dealer's operations and the dealer's real estate. So for that reason, just understanding what it's worth and how to grow its value is going to be key. And where Brett and I focus is that your dealership can serve as the catalyst to really grow your not only business wealth, but also personal wealth as well. And in addition, I think just when you choose to sell, whenever that may at any point in time, it's likely going to be a transaction of a lifetime for you and your family. The assets are going to be rather significant, and our hope is that they're going to provide for a lifestyle maybe beyond what you thought was possible for you and your family. So I think the question we like to ask is, just given the substantial financial and the time investment in your dealership, and knowing that most of the dealer principals we work with spend anywhere from 60 to 80, maybe even 100 hours per week in their dealership, why not essentially capitalize on this asset, not only in the future when you sell, but also now, so that it can really propel and grow your wealth?
Great comments, and I'll add one to it. How many people in the audience are familiar with the 80-20 rule? We got about 30%. So the 80-20 rule is 20% of your actions produce 80% of the results. Well, if you don't know and understand what the value of your business is today, you also don't understand or know what are the key actions you could be taking to drive that business value up over time. We all have more than enough to do as business owners, wearing multiple hats. And if we're not clear on exactly what's going to move the needle in a significant way, we're leaving money on the table, even if we're looking to exit over the next 5 to 10 years. And also, what if the offer that we can't refuse, the offer of a lifetime, comes tomorrow, that phone call saying, I'd like to buy your dealership? If you don't know the value, how do you know that that offer's good or not good? And regardless, whether you're stepping away from your dealership now or even 10 years from now, we're talking about understanding the value of your dealership. How would one go about valuing a dealership? Courtney, maybe you could walk us through some of the different buckets of evaluation.
Yes. This is quite a fun one to tackle right now with everything that's been going on in the market. The first one obviously is goodwill, and that's kind of the number that's that pie in the sky number that we work through a lot of different metrics. So basically, location of your dealership, reputation of your dealership is huge. The franchises under the roof. A lot of people say, oh, my dealership could trade for, what multiple? And it's like, well, are we looking at a multiple of what's gone on in the last 3 years? Are we looking at a multiple prior to COVID? Are we factoring in real estate? Because real estate has been kind of a wild card lately. Values have gone up, which essentially can affect the goodwill, because the business has to be able to support the real estate. So that one's kind of the hard, kind of an art and a science when looking at valuing the dealership. But there's a couple other buckets that we like to say that we fill up. And sometimes this can get, depending on who you're working with, if you're not working with, a professional in the industry like George and myself and my team, some M&A brokers will, they're local and they want to help you out, but they don't guide you or steer you to how these dealerships are typically traded. And we want to make sure that no money is left behind. So the other things that have value in the dealership are your furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And a lot of times, dealers aren't paying attention to their depreciation schedule, or they say, oh, my CPA handles it. But your CPA is not in the dealership. So they don't know the items that are not in the dealership anymore. They don't know maybe the special tools or additional lifts or company vehicles that you've brought into the dealership, because you're not having that communication with them. But it's really important, and it's something we definitely look at and kind of calculate when we're looking at what a dealer is going to walk away with, because essentially that's the number that they're looking at making a decision. That's the number, if you're working with Morgan Stanley, that they're going to need. The next item is company vehicles and trailers, and again, that tends to show up on your depreciation schedule, and that is negotiated separately. So that's another thing that we're looking at. The other one, which is my favorite, parts, accessories, and general merchandise. There's a lot of talk about obsolescence right now, and dealers, I think, for the last 3 years have been, just busy selling, managing COVID. Everything that's been going on. The parts and accessories, I swear, is like the black sheep of the dealership next to service. So we talk to dealers, clean up your parts, look at your obsolescence. Every dollar matters. There's a way that we have a formula when we're looking at the aging. It can change a little bit if you're metric versus Harley Davidson that we look at. And again, that's something, it's a number that's going to go in your pocket. It's, a number that we want to make sure is clean as possible when we're negotiating, because we've seen multiple times where it's like, oh, I don't care, it's clean, we're good, we don't need a third party inventory, or we're just going to do it ourselves. And we get to the closing table, and boy, does that change. Major unit inventory, typically what we see is your new units going to a buyer's new floor plan, and then your pre-owned units, if there's the equity in that is negotiated. Something that I will say, if you're looking to sell, please do not pay off your new units off your floor plan. Had this situation recently, and it's, again, things that we all learned during the transaction. Just going to throw that out there. And then the next biggest piece, which sometimes is bigger than, the assets of the business itself, is the real estate. And typically real estate is, sold at appraised value. I think that's it, just those buckets. All those buckets. All of them add up, essentially. And we want to get the most, if you're deciding to sell, because the more money that we get, the more money they have to help you retire and enjoy the rest of your life. Because after being in this industry for the last 4 years and taking some of these classes and seeing what these dealers have to go through, I don't envy you guys. You guys work hard.
Courtney, what do you see in regards to cash and cash equivalents? In certain industries, there needs to be a certain amount of operational cash or capital that stays in. Others, all the cash belongs to the seller. What do you see?
George, you can speak to this. The cash in the bank goes with the dealer, so there's no working capital. There's typically no working capital that stays in the business. So all the debt is paid off. The buyer gets a clean slate.
Thank you. And George, what is a fair multiple?
It's whatever you want it to be, Brad. No, one of the most common question is, what is my dealership worth and what is the multiple of earnings? And through our process of evaluating your business, there's over 50 metrics that we use to value a powersports dealership. And one of them is being a multiple of earnings. And I could say, based on selling hundreds of these dealerships, they typically trade. One of the ways to value is through a multiple of adjusted earnings that we go through and make sure that all the categories are correct. Like the biggest one, besides salaries, is rent expense, to make sure you've been charging fair market rent. So we normalize the earnings, and historically, small and mid-sized businesses have typically traded, if you look at Pratt stats, at 2 to 2.5 times seller's discretionary cash flow, which includes the owner's salary. In our space, I've seen some buyers, some are here today, that like to pay, 2.5 times, but I've sold large Harley-Davidson dealerships for up to 5 times. I know there's a couple that have sold at 6 times in Texas. So it really is a negotiated item. What we recommend is a buyer do their own buyer pro forma and back into a number that they're comfortable with to pay based on their expectations, their return on investment. But again, we have sales comps as another metric that we use. But just to say there's a multiple of earnings is, a misnomer, because our firm has sold many dealerships that are breaking even losing money for millions of dollars in goodwill, blue sky, because the buyer sees the opportunity. You're buying a franchise dealership with territorial protection, and there's inherent value in owning a territory, a certain brand, whether it's Metric, Harley-Davidson, European brands.
Along with brands and territory, what else might impact the valuation? If I'm a dealer, I'm probably out in the audience thinking, well, how do I command a bigger multiple versus a smaller multiple? How can I be more valuable to that buyer?
Well, what we recommend is to, by preparing your business for sale, the first thing is to have, clean financial statements. A lot of dealers have not even reviewed financial statements. So that's important. Clean financial statements. I think another thing you should look at is your facility. You know, when's the last time that you've painted your building or cleaned it, or now with Harley-Davidson requiring this fuel facility program, what's that going to look like? So there's a lot of, variables that go into maximizing the value. But I think, look, I've got dealers that say, I'm just going to wait another year or two to increase my profits to get a higher price. And my argument, not much is going to change between 1 or 2 years anyway, because the buyer's going to buy the opportunity. These are mostly aging, families that haven't really reinvested in their business necessarily and professionalized them. So the buyer will pay up based on our experience to have that opportunity. So it just depends when you're willing to commit to the process.
I appreciate it, George. And also, we're in an interesting economic time. I think you look at a lot of the economists are saying, what are we going to see in 2024? Maybe lower interest rates, but by how much? Are we going to go through a recession, or are we going to narrowly escape? There seems to be a lot more people right now wanting to sell versus buy. With a lot of this uncertainty that it's out there, what does the buy-sell market look like at this time in the power sports industry? George.
Well, I think we're seeing a shift. In the last few years, it's been really a seller's market because of the profitability of dealerships. I think we're starting to see a shift where we're seeing more sellers raise their hand, so buyers have more selection, which gives them opportunities to bid on several instead of just 1 or 2 dealerships. So I think that the market is kind of turning to more of a buyer's market. I mean, profits are down, margins are down, inventory issues, facility issues. The cost of capital is putting pressure on valuations because as a buyer, you got to go borrow money at a much higher interest rate. So that puts pressure on your return on investment. Those are some of the key things. But I think also the expense to operating a dealership is starting to come back to 2019. The floor plan interest expense is skyrocketed. Advertising now, you got to, and you got to actually sell vehicles instead of just taking orders. And some dealers were charging over MSRP. So now things are really starting to normalize, and so values are coming down.
Okay, thanks, George. And, it can take 6, 9, 12 months even from start to finish in selling a dealership. So, we're really looking economically, what condition are we going to be in 9 to 12 months from now, even if you're considering today? Paulina, Morgan Stanley has a lot of robust economic forecasting resources. Maybe you could share a little bit about what we expect to see economically and how that impacts anyone that might be looking to sell or exit in the next 12 months.
Yeah, I think we get that question a lot, especially beginning of the year. And I think it's fair to say that the majority of market investors and analysts, including at Morgan Stanley, are forecasting for what we call a soft landing. And in other terms, it's just a very muted GDP or economic growth. We're expecting falling inflation for 2024. And perhaps, and most importantly, a more accommodating monetary policy, or essentially lower interest rates at some point in 2024. And Mike Wilson, who's the chief investment officer for Morgan Stanley, essentially just recently came out with 3 probable scenarios for 2024. The first one, and that's the one that's seen most likely at this point happening, is a soft landing with minimal economic growth. The other outcome is a soft landing with accelerating economic growth. And the final scenario is a hard landing, or what you know as a recession. And our Morgan Stanley analysts are putting about a 30% probability of seeing a recession later this year. And I think what we tell dealers all the time is, at best, we are expecting nominal or smaller growth in 2024. At worst, you're seeing another recession on the horizon. So to us, I think that biggest takeaway is that regardless which one of these scenarios becomes our reality, If you are looking to either sell or even grow your value, please know that the economy is not going to bail you out, not in 2024, likely not in 2025. And just a few items that really come to attention. The average U.S. consumer is expected to slow down spending in 2024. They're expected to have diminished access savings and plateauing wages. Unemployment is expected to move a little higher later this year as labor markets continue to normalize, and I think that's something, George, you gently mentioned already. And inflation is cooling, but it's still well above what the Federal Reserve is looking for. So if you are really determined to drive the value of your dealership, then that added value should come from items that you have more control internally as an owner.
I appreciate it. And I want to share that economy or in a slow economy or even a growing economy. We have a friend, not in the power sports industry, but he was looking to sell his business. This was back in 2006. And Ken had wanted $10 million for his business. Now, we ran numbers for Ken showing that he could live the rest of his life out on $6 million. So he wanted 10, he needed 6, he got an offer for 8 and he turned it down. Well, the downturn came in 2008 and he didn't get that valuation back until 2018. So he could have retired 10 years early on an amount that would have suited him just fine. And I share that with you. Sometimes it's less about the situation that we're in, but understanding really what we need. Because if we're waiting to get more than we need, we're not going to be able to spend it anyways, and it's more about the quality of life. What do you want to make sure that you're doing today, and can you get there today? So I wanted to share that as well, that it's not just necessarily about the economy and where that valuation may come in. It's more about you. One thing that I always think is helpful is many of you, when you do exit, you're going through this for the first time, is to learn from common mistakes that others have made so you don't make those same mistakes. By not making those mistakes, it puts more money in your pocket. So George, maybe you could share a little bit about some of the more common mistakes that you see often that take away from value and how they can be avoided.
Don't terminate a franchise when you're deciding to sell.
That happened recently.
It happened recently. It was devastating to me, to the buyer. And I know with COVID, there's a lot of franchises that dealers brought in because your other ones weren't getting you inventory. And I think there's a lot of assessment, figuring out which ones are going to stay, which ones are going to go. But what we've learned or experienced is that you never know what franchise a buyer's looking for. And we've sold a dealership where a dealer wanted one franchise, gave back the rest of them, bought the real estate, put the real estate back on the market the next week. So I would just say that's, I guess, one huge mistake for a dealer because he ended up closing his doors. And the deal fell apart. Because once you start terminating a franchise, that gets out on the open market with the reps. The reps are the worst. They start running their mouths, and the next thing you know, everybody knows what's going on. So I would say really think about, terminating any franchises if you're looking to sell.
I mean, some other things that I think is important is to manage your inventory, your new, your used, your parts, accessories, and general merchandise. We recommend getting a physical inventory once a year. Some of the other things are look at your expense structure, get it in line with what's kind of normal in our industry. And just some other housekeeping things from just the facility is a big one, I would say. And like we talked about earlier, clean financial statements helps a lot. So those are some of the things that I would recommend to do to prepare your business for sale.
Perfect. Thanks, George. And just to add on to that, many times there's kind of a saying, and I think you guys are the ones who told me that, was that when you have one buyer, you don't have a buyer. The importance of having multiple buyers interested in your dealership has them compete on the price they will give you, and in many cases allows you to maximize the value that you get, the price that you get. The other is that sometimes when we finally decide we're going to exit, we get in a mindset where we're not necessarily having our head in the business the way that it used to be. You need to continue to run your business as if you're not going to sell. And although that sounds like a contradiction, if you're out of the game and profits and top line suffer, it is not uncommon to have a buyer then look and retrade the deal or ask for a lower price or even back out altogether. And if that happens, now you're left with a less valuable business and no buyer. Just a few things to keep in mind. Paulina, I'm sure, will address this here shortly, but also the importance of the right team. You can't do it alone. You're typically going to need an attorney, a CPA, a financial advisor, and a business broker as key members of that team. Making sure that you've got the right folks in place that have industry experience and understand the world of power sports and also have experience in helping other dealers buy and sell is absolutely critical. And with that in mind, Paulina, maybe you could share some common financial planning strategies that dealers can go through in order to grow their value and their wealth.
Sure, and that's actually one of the things that I've jotted down here. I think financial planning starts with one single question. Do you have the right plan, process, and people by your side? Because that's really what it comes down to. The right plan will typically involve a well-written or a well-defined written action plan, I should say. Just understanding your goals, not only over the next 3 to 5 years, but even beyond that time frame. Whether you're adding an additional rooftop, you're looking at acquisitions, maybe you're looking at an internal succession and exit. Perhaps there are some shifting family dynamics, big personal goals that you want to take into consideration. Those factors shape your financial planning, and in fact, it's one of the very first things that Brett and I do, is we just spend a lot of time talking to dealers about what's important to them personally, because everyone in this audience here today is going to have a very different financial plan and a personal story and the direction of where they want to be in life 5 to 10 years from today. And for instance, the one example that comes to mind, we've worked with a dealer in Texas a few years ago, and the dealer wanted to sell at the time. He was a C corporation. And as you may know, there are very different taxations for what we call flow-through entities, S corporations and LLCs, compared to a C corporation instead. And that dealer was based in Texas. He was ready to sell. He actually had a buyer at the table. And at the time, we met up with his CPA to essentially do a walkaway proceeds calculation to determine how much the family would walk away with. Well, the C corporation wasn't necessarily favorable from a tax standpoint, and the dealer found out that the net proceeds were not enough for him and his family to be able to retire and essentially move on to that next chapter of life. And what ended up happening, there is a rule that if you're converting from a C to an S corporation, you have to wait essentially 5 years to be treated as an S corporation from the IRS perspective. So that dealer had to delay his retirement by 5 years. He actually chose to delay selling for 5 years and grow the value of that dealership before relisting the dealership on that market. The other two pieces that we've mentioned are process and people. They're just as important. And I'm going to bring up an example of the dealer we actually all worked on together on the East Coast about 18 months ago. And that dealer, during regular conversations, essentially mentioned that he owned a multi-million-dollar real estate property. And very much right off the bat, the acquirer was not only looking to purchase the dealership operations, but also the dealership real estate. And the dealer made it clear to us he's not interested in being a landlord. So very early on, the CPA, the attorney, George, Courtney, myself, and Brad got involved in having conversations. It turned out the real estate purchase agreement did not have a 1031 clause, which is essentially a clause that allows you to replace one income-producing property for another income-producing property and allows you to defer taxes or eliminate the gains altogether if you hold it until your passing. That was fixed before the transaction was completed. The CPA actually sat down with us and the dealer and estimated that the dealer would owe about $1.3 million in taxes if the real estate sold and he didn't replace the property. And that allowed the dealer some time to get educated, make an educated decision on what he wanted to do next. And then finally, because he didn't want to be a landlord, we were able to suggest what we call a 1031 Delaware Statutory Trust Fund, which is a professionally managed real estate fund. So he didn't have to be a landlord. He deferred taxes, and essentially it was a win-win all across the board. So again, just having the right plan and understanding the dealer's plan where they want to be, having a process so that open line of communication amongst all of the partners involved, and just a good advisory team did make a world of a difference for that dealer personally.
Thanks, Paulina. And I think all this really leads to maybe the most important point on the planning side is planning in advance. And a lot of these things that we're talking about, if you're in the middle of a deal, it's going to be, I wouldn't say too late, but you're going to be far better in putting these pieces together before you even go to market. Because if you understand your situation and know what you want, then your team can negotiate on your behalf to get you what you need. How can you ask a buyer for a specific price or certain things in a deal if you don't yourself know exactly what you're going to need to get out of it to make sure that you're able to reach your own goals? And we look at dealers just starting to think about valuing or selling their dealerships. We've covered a lot of information here. How do we really whittle it down into some initial steps that one can take to get started? Courtney and George?
Yeah, I guess just kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier, as a current real estate appraisal, I really think that we just find a lot of value in having a good idea of where the real estate is. And I know it's an expense, but it's one well worth spending because it really factors into when we're looking at, recasting the financials and, the adjusted net profit. It can be a big difference. We've seen, dealers charging what they thought was fair market value rent, and then we get the real estate appraisal back, and it's double what they thought the value was, which is great, right? Because now we have double the amount of real estate, but it's really, hurting the bottom line because essentially the buyer, coming in is going to be paying the fair market value of the real estate. I think just what George said, cleaning up the financials, the balance sheet. One thing that I've noticed, and I want to kind of touch on with the meeting that we went in, this morning, I had the pleasure of sending myself to Sioux Falls, South Dakota for a week-long training at Spader Business Management. It was so fun. Being a part of a 20 group. I mean, I'm not a dealer, but I can see the value of it. And I talk to a lot of my dealers, when we're starting this process, are you in a 20 group? And if they tell me no, I know the state of the financials that I'm going to get. Because when you look at the financials that are coming from a dealer that's in a 20 group, completely different. So I would just say I'm not advocating for one or the other. I'm just saying I can see the value in being a part of a 20 group. What else do you think? I think we've hit on everything else. And before we end, if you're not part of the MPDA, join. If you're not part of the MIC, join. It's my shameless plug for them. They're doing amazing. They really are. They're doing amazing things. I mean, this is my 4th year here at AIMExpo. He's been coming a lot longer. And to see that, I know we're talking like economy and, all this kind of stuff, but look at this floor. Like anybody that's been here for however many years, this is amazing. They've added more. It's just amazing. All the people that are here, they're spending their money to be here. The dealer turnout is phenomenal. It's just, I don't know, it's great. I think COVID has done some wonderful things for this industry. So.
If I can just maybe then add just a few final comments. I think we've made it clear throughout the session, but our teams are really just here to educate and be a resource. If you have questions, if you want us to help, we strongly recommend it. Just consider connecting with us for our resources, including the Second Opinion service. We enjoyed these group speaking sessions, but even leading up to today's sessions, we realized that dealers have more burning questions, and odds are you're not going to raise your hand and maybe ask about succession or exit planning. It's a very much an individual conversation. So please reach out to us. We're here to help. And I think we've mentioned this already, but we hope that you realize that valuing your dealership and financial planning is not just an exercise you do at exit or succession. It's about growing your wealth, understanding the financial, tax, legal, operating, and dealership value decisions. I know Courtney's very passionate about this, but it's not just, again, an exit. It's planning for burnout, death, divorce, and other life events that can get in the way. It's really driving that maximum value of your dealership so that you and your family can live a lifestyle beyond what you thought was possible. So if you're sitting here in the audience, if you're thinking, how does my corporate structure impact me from a tax standpoint or at the time of a sale? If you're wondering, how would your dealership be valued in the eyes of a third-party buyer based on your most up-to-date financials, those are the types of resources that we can offer. And again, what we offer are complimentary resources with no obligation.
Come on, Bob. Give me one question.
Well, if we've got no questions today, again, thank you for joining us here at AIMExpo. We can be found at booth 6056 and 6058. We're actually adjacent to each other. And we typically like to wrap things up with a quote. So an hour of planning can save you 10 hours of doing. And our teams really hope just to continue to be a resource for you all. If you do have any questions, stop by, and if you filled out the card, we'll be sure to reach out to you as soon as we're back home from AIMExpo. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.